Our top story: proposals for a United Nations-backed peace summit to end the war in Ukraine, but there's appears to be little hope for getting both Ukraine and Russia around the table. As fighting continues to rage in the frontline city of Bakhmut, the eastern Ukraine city, the country's foreign minister Dmitry Kuleba says that his nation wants a peace summit within 2 months at the United Nations, with Secretary General Antonio Guterres as mediator. The United Nations gave a cautious response to the proposal, saying all parties must agree to negotiate for talks to be successful. Well, it comes as Russia's President Vladimir Putin hosted the Belarusian counterpart Alexander Lukashenko at the St. Petersburg. Well, last week, Lukashenko met Mr. Putin in Minsk, prompting speculations that Putin was seeking to cajole Belarus into joining Russia's military campaign in Ukraine. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov this afternoon warned that Ukraine must demilitarize and threatened further military action if it did not. And Arise News chief correspondent John Cookson joins me now from London to take a look at this development today. Well, John, thank you so much for being here. And of course, we have talked about peace talks here on the show in the past. Are these ones the same ones, really?
Good to see you. Well, they're not. And let's talk about the other peace talks in a moment. Let's concentrate, first of all, on what the Ukrainian foreign minister is saying. And, wouldn't this be fantastic if both sides could get together for peace talks within 2 months, by the end of February is what he's proposing. But I'm afraid there's a massive, massive reality check here, because the conditions under which the Ukrainians will meet are not going to be accepted by Russia. Let's just say this, that Zelensky has said, the Ukrainian president has said, that he wants to see regime change in Moscow. Well, I can't see Putin stepping down. Secondly, he wants a full withdrawal of all Russian troops from Ukrainian territory, including the 4 annexed provinces and Crimea. Are the Russians really going to do that? I don't think so, especially after so many thousands of Russians have died securing that land. So although on the surface this offer from Ukraine sounds amazing, and yes, you think that they must do it, they must get around the table, I'm afraid it really isn't going to happen. The Russians have spoken in the past about negotiating, being prepared to negotiate with all parties, although Sergei Lavrov said today, the Russian foreign minister, and you alluded to it earlier, said that Ukraine has to accept the loss of all Russian territory. All Russian territory that's controlled by the Russians. These are the 4 provinces and Crimea. And if they don't do that, it's up to the Russian army to sort it out. So that's the background to these proposed peace talks, which I really can't say are going to happen. Now, I have mentioned on this show in the past, 3 or 4 weeks ago, that there are secret talks going on, because being realistic, the only 2 people who can settle this war are President Biden and Putin. And I understand there are back channel negotiations going on. How much progress they're making, it's hard to tell. Tonight, it seems like good news. The Ukrainians are happy to talk peace, but being realistic, these peace talks that the Ukrainians are proposing are just not going to happen.
Well, John, you're not sounding optimistic, really. But at the end of the day, a proposal has been put forward by the Ukrainians. Well, the question right now is, can you see a UN-hosted peace talks finding the much-needed lasting solution to the crisis there?
Well, Amaka, first of all, there has to be a ceasefire. There can be no peace talks while they're bombing each other, Russia and Ukraine, or fighting on the battlefield. And there's no sign of that. In fact, the opposite seems to be happening at the moment. The Russians and the Ukrainians digging in for a long winter. We had that attack today deep in Russian territory on Russian bombers by a Ukrainian drone at the Engels air base, which will have infuriated the Russians, and the Russians will reply to that, I'm sure, in due course. And we still have these bombings of the cities going on by Russian drones and cruise missiles. So there's no ceasefire on the cards at the moment. So there can't be any peace talks unless there's a ceasefire. When they start talking about ceasefire, then possibly we can talk about peace talks headed by the UN. Well, the UN knows that you can only get both sides together if both sides accept the UN being a mediator. Now, Ukraine would have no problem with that, but Putin, is he going to really accept Antonio Guterres as an honest broker when the Russians tend to see the UN as an extension of the American government? So again, I'm sorry to be the bringer of bad news, but I don't think UN broker peace talks are really a possibility. Trying to be positive here, there are other players in the world like Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, and also even Saudi Arabia, which has mediated between Russia and the rest of the world. I think that's more of a possibility, certainly for an early round of peace talks rather than the UN.
Well, John, as we get ready to wrap up this conversation, we really need to talk about the fact that the presidents of Belarus and Russia have met twice in 48 hours. Quickly, what exactly is going on?
Well, military experts will say that this has to be a precursor for the launch of an imminent Belarus-Russian attack through Belarus into the north of Ukraine. You remember back in February of this year, that's the way some of the Russian tanks came, and also Russian Air Force, and that Belarus territory being used as a launch pad for a new strike against Ukraine. That's the fear.
Well, John, even though you're not optimistic, we're just hoping that this war, some sort of solution, we just need to find it as soon as possible. John Cookson, Arise Chief Correspondent in London, thank you.